Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Punishment Podcast. I am the host who shall not be named, and today we are talking about my beloved New Orleans Pelicans, an organization that has brought me almost nothing but false hope, disappointment, and misery. Where to even begin? I suppose it's best to begin at the beginning. For those of you who don't know, basketball in New Orleans actually started in the 70s, 1974. The New Orleans Jazz, an expansion team in the ABA, only last about 5 years, but the highlight was Pistol Pete Maravich's scoring record, I think a year before the team is eventually moved to Salt Lake City, which is how the Utah Jazz exists despite the state and city having no relationship with jazz music or jazz culture in any way, shape, or form. But it is what it is. The real history of this franchise, though, begins in 2002, but we're going to start a little bit earlier than that with a man named George Shinn. I'm just going to straight up read this paragraph from Wikipedia and maybe y'all can make sense of it. Shinn worked in a textile mill, a car wash, and as a school janitor. He later attended Evans Business College in Concord, North Carolina, while working with real estate and car dealerships. Upon graduating, he raised enough money to buy Evans College and other small colleges, consolidating them all under the umbrella company Rutledge Education Systems. He sold the schools and bought the basketball team with the proceeds. This was 1987. He bought the Charlotte Hornets for $32 million. It feels like there's a sentence missing here or something. What do you mean that upon graduating he had raised enough money to buy the school? What? Imagine giving this guy like a D on a report, and then like a year and a half later, he buys the school and fires you. Whatever, it doesn't matter too much. There's not all that much information about how any of this went down. Presumably, family money is involved. The impetus for the move to New Orleans comes some 20 or so years later. A sexual assault allegation is levied against Shinn in 1997. Really messy trial. Eventually, the case is dismissed. Court rejects the claims, but during the proceedings, Shinn admits to having two sexual relationships outside of his marriage. Now, in North Carolina, it's actually a misdemeanor. It's illegal to have sex outside of your marriage. This is called adultery. But he wasn't on trial for that, so there's no legal repercussions to him admitting to it. But it does a number on his reputation, especially in North Carolina. So, kind of like tail end of the Bible Belt. Pretty like religious influences in the area, and everybody just sours on this guy. They fucking hate him. So he's like, okay, shit, I gotta move the team. I gotta get the fuck out of here. And he did not want to go to New Orleans, by the way. He wanted to go to Memphis. He wanted to go to Louisville. He wanted to go fucking anywhere that wanted him, but he loses out the deal to go to Memphis. Instead, the Vancouver Grizzlies end up moving. And then the whole deal with Louisville just does not pan out. Rick Pitino says no, and so David Stern says no. And in the end, New Orleans just comes out like a bandit out of like the messiest situation possible. A beautiful start to the team. And so since it's not like an actual expansion team, we just inherit the players and the coaches of the Charlotte Hornets. So we get, Jamal Mashburn, Baron Davis, and Coach Paul Silas. And in the first year, we actually make the playoffs. But Paul Silas gets fired immediately after. We lose to Allen Iverson and the 76ers in the first round. Silas's replacement is Tim Floyd, who also makes the playoffs and also gets fired immediately afterwards, losing to Dwayne Wade and the young Heat. And then we bring on our coach of the future, Byron Scott. And immediately we're terrible for a couple of years. We have, Obviously Hurricane Katrina happens in this time, and so we're splitting time between Oklahoma City and like a few games in Baton Rouge, and the team doesn't really have a home. A lot of people are talking about, maybe this team should just stay in Oklahoma City because they were kind of rallying around the team more than New Orleans had been. But Shin keeps the team in New Orleans. I've imagined he had enough of the relocation nonsense. It had only been like 3 years, anyways, by the time Hurricane Katrina rolls around. And that's, I think, Chris Paul's first year in New Orleans is the Hurricane Katrina year. So he's not even in New Orleans despite being drafted by the New Orleans franchise. But after a couple of years, we moved back. I should also point out that in this time, we drafted J.R. Smith in the first round. Just a fun fact. I didn't know that we drafted him, but I discovered that here. 2 years after we draft Chris Paul, maybe 3 years after we draft Chris Paul, we finally returned to the playoffs. 2008, beat Dirk Nowitzki's Mavericks in the first round, 4-1. Lose to, I believe, eventual champions San Antonio Spurs. This is like David West, Chris Paul, Tyson Chandler. Like this team was actually really fun, really good. We made the playoffs, I think, two more times with Chris Paul. Lose to the Denver Nuggets and the Lakers with Kobe Bryant and Pau Gasol. But Shin, who is not really a successful businessman outside of owning, having apparently buying the college that he went to, and then the Charlotte Hornets for, pennies on the dollar of what it would end up being worth. He finds himself eventually strapped for cash. This was actually like, pretty consistent throughout his history, with the franchise. Like when he first moved here, he didn't want to have to actually pay for like a dedicated cheerleading squad. So instead he had a tryout for young women in the area and ended up picking just 5 LSU students because they said that they could carpool together and reduce the cost to $50 to get to the game. That was like the big selling point. They were called the Honeybees. They continued to exist until we changed the name to the Pelicans later and ended up getting a whole dance squad and everything. But that's much later when the Bensons end up owning the team. The whole Shin history in New Orleans kind of ends in a big debacle where he's trying to sell the team for about $300 million to a local shipbuilder. For whatever reason, pulls out of the deal, and Shin was like desperate for money, so he couldn't afford to keep the team running anymore. Like while the team was accruing value as an asset, it was losing money every year. So Shin just wanted to get the fuck out. Like he was just, he was just trying to get his bag and run away. And nobody wanted to buy the team, at least nobody in the local area. So in the end, the league ends up having to step in and they take ownership. This is like totally unprecedented in professional sports. And so for 2 years, the team is owned and run by just the NBA. And they end up orchestrating the deal that sends Chris Paul to the LA Clippers. The Pelicans get totally fucking shafted in this deal. We have the Clippers like the face of their franchise for the next like 5, 6, 7 years. And in return, we got Eric Gordon and Ryan Anderson. Now, Ryan Anderson was solid, but Eric Gordon, maybe the most hated player in the history of the organization. Like the epitome of like just collecting a check. This dude never gave a fuck about being in New Orleans, never wanted to be here, never gave any significant effort at all while he was on the team, and he got paid tens of millions of dollars. Eventually, the owner of the New Orleans Saints, Tom Benson, steps up and says, I think he came to the realization that if anyone else was going to buy the team, that the team was going to move. That was the rhetoric of the time. So Tom Benson said, I'm going to buy the team just to make sure that it stays in New Orleans. So, hats off to Mr. B for sure. One of the New Orleans greats. I don't want to get too nitty gritty into like the basketball itself until we get to later stages, but After the Chris Paul departure, within a couple of years, we luck out in the lottery. I think we had really, really low odds for this one. And we get Anthony Davis, who is like surefire generational talent, just led the, Kentucky. Where are they? Are they the Bobcats? Whatever. Just led Kentucky to a national championship as a freshman. He averaged like 6 blocks a game or something fucking ridiculous. And he comes to New Orleans. He's immediately amazing. Rookie of the year, a whole shebang. But the team is pretty trash. And we make a trade for Drew Holiday. And this is like actually a pretty controversial thing because apparently the Sixers withheld medical records in order to get this trade to go through. And it actually changes some of the rules about like the information that teams have to disclose when they make trades afterwards. And Drew's first few years in New Orleans are just completely mired by injury. Like he's not really playing more than 40 games a year because he's got this really bad ankle issue. But eventually he does overcome this. I think what we gave them in return was Nerlens Noel. I'm gonna actually check this out. Yeah. We gave them the sixth overall pick, which was Nerlens Noel. So, in the end, we dominated this trade despite the fact that Drew had all of these injury problems that were not disclosed. We come out like bandits somehow. And the team, Drew had a lot of injury problems. AD had less injury problems early in his career, but he was still, every once in a while, like going out for an extended period of time. He was only playing like 60 games a year. The team had a lot of problems, and really the pinnacle of this original iteration, this is after Alvin Gentry eventually gets hired, because Monty Williams, who I've just totally skipped over, Monty Williams was like the main coach for a lot of the Chris Paul years and early Anthony Davis, but eventually changing of the guard, Dell Demps gets rid of him, brings in Alvin Gentry, who's like big into this whole pace and space. He's like former D'Antoni assistant coach. So really into pace and space, pushing the ball, taking a lot of threes. And this is actually a really fun team to watch, in my opinion. We had Tyreek Evans, who was like former rookie of the year with the Sacramento Kings, and ends up getting traded to us. Other mainstays of this era are like Omer Ashik, who ends up, y'all probably don't even know this, Omer, his last year in the NBA, 2017, he got a bacterial infection that caused rapid weight loss. Like this guy, who, by the way, was like fucking skin and bone already, but he's 7 feet tall, so he weighed like 240. He drops like 30 pounds. He is fucking 7 feet tall, 200 pounds, soaking wet. Like disgustingly skinny. Ends up having to retire like immediately after. But we were paying him like $13 million a year for basically the entirety of the Anthony Davis era. And we also had Solomon Hill, who apparently was like an absolute beast in practice and then just complete dog shit whenever an actual game started. And we were paying him like $10 million a year. And that really hamstrung the Pels during this period. And this was all like, mismanagement by Dell Demps. That was, the rhetoric of the time. And the only thing we ever really had to show for it up until 2018 was one first round exit where we got swept by the eventual champion Golden State Warriors. That was their first championship. They beat us in the first round. But 2018 rolls around and there's, Dell Demps is really on the hot seat, right? So he brings in a big veteran voice in Rajon Rondo, who is considered well past his prime at this point, kind of like a damaged asset. I think he only signs like a 1-year deal with us. And then at the trade deadline, during the All-Star break, hosted in New Orleans, Boogie Cousins of the Sacramento Kings finds out that he has been traded to the New Orleans Pelicans. And thus begins the very short-lived Twin Tower era of the New Orleans Pelicans, because despite it being really fun and really exciting, We have Boogie, AD, Drew Holiday, Rajon Rondo, Nikola Mirotic, a bunch of like exciting players, a really good team. Etwan Moore. Boogie tears his fucking Achilles tendon in overtime, I believe, against the Portland Trailblazers. I'm not even going to bother to double check that. We'll just go with my memory. I know it was in overtime. And this was like a week or two before the playoffs. Team is devastated, but we had won enough games at this point that we were just going to make the playoffs anyways. I think we make it as the sixth seed, and we go against the Portland Trailblazers. God, now I got to double check the Boogie thing. No, no. Apologies. Boogie Cousins tears his Achilles against the Houston Rockets in overtime. This was the year after he had gotten traded. He got traded in 2017. And, it was really good for the last 2 months of the season. Dell Demps is like, okay, maybe I actually have done something. He brings on Rajon Rondo. We have Nikola Mirotic, Etwan Moore, Drew Holiday, and Anthony Davis are playing great basketball. The team is actually really, really fucking exciting. And for the first 3 months of the year, the team is really good. The Twin Towers thing is working. Rajon Rondo is clearly having an effect on the team. We're like top three, top four in the Western Conference standings. But late January, like 3 months before the season's over, DeMarcus Cousins full rupture of his left Achilles against the Houston Rockets in overtime. And I mean, this is like a knife to the fucking heart. This was like, we thought we were going to be fucking contenders. Anthony Davis is an MVP candidate. All this shit. But in one fell swoop, it kind of all falls apart. But the team keeps cooking. We end up being the sixth seed in the Western Conference, and we go against the Portland Trailblazers in the first round. And we swept those motherfuckers. This is easily the highlight of my New Orleans Pelicans fandom. Easily the highlight. Thought we were going to get shit on in the series. This was Dame Dollar, CJ McCollum. God, it fucking hurts to say that CJ McCollum was once a good player, once respected, but no. Dame Dollar, CJ McCollum, and we swept those motherfuckers. I We had Rajon Rondo with like a 25 assist game. AD and Drew Holiday both dropped 40 in the last game to clinch it. And we go against who else but the eventual champions, Golden State Warriors, this time with Kevin Durant. And we lose, gentleman's sweep. I think we were the only people to take a game off of the Warriors that year. Fun fact. Only team to take a game off of them in the playoffs. The last time in the Anthony Davis era that we would make the playoffs, because pretty soon after, he requests a trade. This includes the infamous "That's all, folks" shirt that he wore the day after he requested the trade. AD claims that he doesn't dress himself, so he actually didn't pick that shirt. Anthony Davis soon traded to the Los Angeles Lakers. Let's do a little referendum on how that trade went. The Pelicans, in return for Anthony Davis, received Lonzo Ball, later traded for Tomas Satoransky and Garrett Temple. Josh Hart, later traded for Larry Nance and CJ McCollum. I guess CJ McCollum part of the trade. I think we also included a Lakers pick in that. So we'll consider CJ McCollum a part of the end package here. Brandon Ingram traded for Kelly Olynyk and Bruce Brown, who is already fucking gone. We received the number 4 pick, which we expertly turned into Jackson Hayes and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. The 2022 first round pick became Dyson Daniels, which later became DeJounte Murray. And the 2025 Lakers pick also included in that trade. So, all told, the Pelicans at this point, from this massive haul that they received from Anthony Davis, are left with CJ McCollum, and Kelly Olynyk. That's fucking it. That's all we got for that. You know what the goddamn Lakers turned Anthony Davis into? They got fucking Luka Doncic out of that motherfucker. What the fuck are we doing? People were talking as if the Pels had won the trade for years. We got smoked in this motherfucker. Lakers got a title and Luka Doncic. The fuck did we get, man? Ugh. But, uh, you know, maybe coincidentally, the team that trades their superstar to the Los Angeles Lakers seems to have a way of finding the number one overall pick. And while that might be Cooper Flag for the Dallas Mavericks this year, 5 years ago that was Zion Williamson. Let's get into the juicy stuff. The Zion Williamson era. Finally, the Pelicans cast away the hostile spirit of Dell Demps and introduce former Cleveland Cavaliers executive and noted LeBron James Glazer, David Griffin. Now, a lot can be said about David Griffin and his time with New Orleans. A lot of people like to point to his positive draft record. I'd argue that isn't entirely him. He's not even the general manager. It was Trajan Langdon for the entirety of David Griffin's tenure. So, how much can be attributed to David Griffin? How much can be attributed to Langdon? You know, who's to really say? We're not in the room. But I'd like to remind everyone that David Griffin was also the head executive when the Cleveland Cavaliers drafted Anthony Bennett, perhaps the greatest draft bust in NBA history. So, how good is he really? But, what can be said about David Griffin is he was not afraid to make moves. One of the first ones he did was the trade sending Drew Holiday to the Milwaukee Bucks, which resulted in a championship for the Bucks as well. Funny how that seems to happen. But we got a lot of dog shit out of that. We ended up, it's a lot of teams involved, but we end up with Steven Adams. We end up with Eric Bledsoe, both of whom have to get moved very quickly afterwards. We turned them into Jonas Valanciunas, Devontae Graham. Something notable about both Eric Bledsoe and Devontae Graham is they were both pretty good three-point shooters before they came to the Pels, and then immediately became dog shit as soon as they got here. But it's really funny because at the time we had this guy Fred Vinson, who recently got poached by the Detroit Pistons. But we had this guy Fred Vinson, and he's like the most highly touted shot doctor in the NBA. This is probably the only real claim to fame outside of David Griffin that any of the staff had. Like, this guy was actually really respected. He's the guy who remade Lonzo Ball's shot. For a long period, the Pels were really banking on this guy. We kept drafting people who couldn't shoot. Like Herb Jones, Jose, Nikhil Alexander Walker, Dyson Daniels. We had tons of these guys, and we were just like, oh, well, Fred will teach them how to shoot. And in some respects, that did work out. Like Najee Marshall, Jose Alvarado, Herb Jones. They all became much, much better shooters, and I think largely as a result of Fred Vinson. The original patient was Lonzo, who had the ugliest, most broken jumper anyone had ever seen. And then, while with the Pels, he became pretty respectable, high volume three-point shooter. And the same shit happened with Brandon Ingram, by the way, who to this day is a really, really good catch and shoot three-point guy, but is absolutely dog shit off the dribble. And this is why you see like a lot of fluctuation with BI in terms of his like three-point volume and efficiency, because when he has somebody who can pass him the ball when he's open on the three-point line, then he's great. He'll take like 9 threes a game and he'll make like 40% of them. But when he's the guy who's got to create everything, then he's terrible. He's going to take like 2 threes a game and he's going to shoot terribly from there. But, none of that even matters anymore because Brandon is off the team. And what we got in return was goddamn Kelly Olynyk. Here's something interesting about Kelly Olynyk. After we traded for him, Pelicans were really depleted. thanks to injuries this year. So Kelly Olynyk immediately moves into the starting lineup despite being almost 40 years old and never ever being very good. But he has a good game. He scores like 20 points, gets 10 rebounds, like 5 assists. And after the game, Willie Green gets on the fucking podium, man, and he's like, "Yeah, Willie Kelly is a he's a veteran, like he knows a lot of stuff, and we really want to like play through him. We want to unlock what he could do as a basketball player." Like, motherfucker, this guy's 40 years old. Everybody has seen exactly what Kelly Olynyk could be as a basketball player. What do you mean we're fucking playing through him? We're gonna unlock something in Kelly Olynyk that hasn't existed for 20 years? But I'm jumping way ahead here. Let's talk about the early Zion Williamson era. Let's talk about Stan Van Gundy, who only lasted a year. This actually matches up pretty well with other Pelicans coaching history because we went Paul Silas, and then Tim Floyd for 1 year, then Byron Scott for a long time. And then when Byron Scott gets fired, we go Jeff Bauer for 1 year, Monty Williams for a long time. And then we go to Alvin Gentry immediately after, which also lasts a long time, but Stan Van Gundy 1 year, Willie Green for a long time afterwards. But Stan Van only lasts for 1 year because he's an old ass motherfucker, and he is a honky. So we had Zion and this young core and all that blah blah blah, and they couldn't care less about what this motherfucker had to say. Zion, Zion was too busy spanking his meat to fucking hentai of his favorite anime show or whatever the fuck, banging OnlyFans models. He had no goddamn time to listen to Stan Van talk about, X's and O's. So Stan Van gone after just 1 year, despite the fact that he is the person who introduces Point Zion, which was like a total explosion. This is when everybody was really on the fucking Zion train. And he was scoring like 30 points every single game despite being on a bit of a minutes restriction. And I largely credit that as like the biggest offensive innovation in the entire Zion Williamson era. Absolutely nothing similar to that comes out of Willie Green in the 5 years afterwards. But Stan Van only lasts 1 year, and a lot of the complaints are, the roster construction just doesn't make any sense because we have Steven Adams who can't shoot. Steven Adams, basically just a statue. Just a man made of stone who, when he's not setting screens, is just under the basket waiting for an offensive rebound. And that's just a fucking nightmare next to Zion Williamson. So we said, okay, we need a center who can space the floor. Let's go get Jonas Valanciunas. And in this trade, we trade the 14th pick for the 17th pick, which we end up drafting Trey Murphy, who has panned out to be a very good player. But, we could have drafted him with the 14th pick anyway, so it's not really a win. And Jonas had a tricky time in New Orleans because, he spaces the floor more than Steven Adams, but it's like a difference of 10 feet. This guy's not going to the three-point line. He never averaged more than 2 threes a game in New Orleans, even though he shot pretty well on them. But it was an insane-looking shot, man. He had a fucking catapult, and he was launching that bitch from his toes. Tell you what, but Jonas never got comfortable behind the three-point line, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that the Pelicans' X's and O's are just an absolute fucking nightmare. Before we brought on James Borrego, which is like the first 4 years under Willie Green, or maybe the first 3 years under Willie Green, the Pelicans were last among all NBA teams for all 3 years in pick and rolls. We never fucking ran pick and rolls. It's largely a function of the fact that we didn't have a point guard. But it's like, this is just the most basic play in basketball. Why are we not doing it? So instead, what we do is, we spend the first 15 seconds of the shot clock just trying to get the ball to Zion or Brandon Ingram or Jonas Valanciunas. And then in the last 8 seconds, everyone but Jonas and Zion fan out to the three-point line and let whoever has the ball cook. That was the whole fucking offense. If we weren't getting it in transition, then it was going to be just some ugly-ass half-court offense. Because Willie just refused to let Zion take the ball up the court, and he didn't even really like Brandon taking the ball up the court. That would always be like some fucking random intermediary. Um, and when we had Lonzo, it was fine. When you had an actual point guard and things looked good, but he gets the fuck out of New Orleans as soon as he can, and he's got to be the only player in the franchise's history to become injury prone after he leaves. Yeah, it feels like fucking. I mean, like at one point in the Anthony Davis era, we had 26 people play at least 2 games for the team, and all of them, every single person, all 26, averaged more than 10 minutes per game. And like the injury woes obviously have continued. Like Zion is up there with like fucking Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid is like least reliable players ever. And not that Brandon was really any better in his time here, but he at least would be healthy when we needed him most. Like when it comes playoff time, Brandon would play. He would play in the playing games. He would, be out there for us to get swept by whoever. Whatever it may be. He can find a way to get healthy when we truly need him. And it's the opposite with Zion. He only plays in the meaningless, in the fucking meaningless December games, all the shit before All-Star week or when the season's already fucking collapsed. Oh, look, Zion's playing. But we did draft exceptionally well. We really have. Despite the fact that we haven't really gotten the most out of a lot of the players that we have drafted, like Nikhil Alexander Walker, when he was here, was just kind of a shot chucker, pretty long, but never really figured it out on the defensive end. But then, now he's in Minnesota and he's like an excellent bench player for them. Something that he never was able to be here. As I recall, because there are a lot of people who were on the Gnaw train for a while. He's, by the way, the cousin of Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. He had really good stats when he was in the starting lineup, but nobody was ever, Alvin Gentry, Stan Van Gundy, Willie Green, none of them were interested in starting him. So it was only as a result of injury that he would ever get to do that. And he would average like 20 points per game on good shooting splits. But, there are games that we're losing because, we don't have the full roster. And in the end, he just gets shipped off with Josh Hart in the CJ McCollum trade. What a fucking disaster that trade was, by the way. I mean, we got Larry Nance, who was good for a while, and he ends up getting shipped off with Dyson Daniels for DeJounte. But like CJ McCollum, bro, and it's not even entirely his fault, right? Because a lot of CJ's tenure here, he's supposed to be like the third wheel, but instead, Brandon is out all the time. Zion's not playing for like whole years at a time, and it's just on CJ, the only one who's actually fucking playing basketball to carry the whole load. And so in Willie Green's offense, that just means dribble, 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 and see whatever fucking shot you create out of that because we refuse to run pick and rolls. But, is what it is. The thing that really pisses me off about CJ is that we very quietly gave him a like 3-year, $120 million extension the year after we traded for him. He had like fucking 3 good weeks here playing point guard. And immediately we're like, okay, well, we'll just give him all the money that we have for the next few years. Like, oh, just can no longer improve the team in any meaningful way now. Even he has had some injury problems. He had the whole thing with his thumb. He had the punctured lung. I think he's gotten sick a few times. I'm I'm not so much on the CJ hate train like a lot of people are, just because he's not the fucking problem. He's just like, he's the guy who's on the court, so like he's the one who like appears to be the problem, but it's the guys who aren't playing. It's the guy on the fucking bench. It's the guy, in the executive booth. Those are the ones who are really tearing the fucking team apart. But, it doesn't all have to be doom and gloom because there have been bright spots here. Like that trip to the playoffs, going through San Antonio and DeJounte Murray in the play-in game. And then that one was at home. And then against the Clippers in LA, beating. I don't think they had Kawhi, so it was just the Paul George Clippers. That was a cool moment. Get to go against the Suns, take a couple of games off of them. But it's like that's the peak, right? Winning two games in the first round. That's the peak in this era. And one of the big issues that the Pelicans have had is that there is so much incompetence. There are so many problems that you essentially can't blame anyone in particular. You try to pin it on David Griffin and poor roster construction. The star players are never on the court. How can it be his fault in trying to build a team when he doesn't even know what the team looks like? Because they're never all together. So, oh well, how can you blame it on Willie Green? For the exact same reasons he doesn't have his best player. Like, who cares that the offense looks like it's from like the first 5 years of basketball? Who cares that we're just everybody's just going through the motions and nobody really seems to respect him as a leader and that he's constantly making boneheaded decisions with timeouts and rotations and yada yada. It's not his fault. It's the fact that Zion's not playing. It's like, oh, you try to blame it on Zion and you say, well, he's got a fucking dog shit coach and he can't control injuries and the roster doesn't make any sense next to him. It's everybody's fault, you know? And every year they're just like, well, we'll just run it back. We're not really sure what we have. Let's just run it back. Let's just run it back. And then finally the wheels completely come off this year and you have no choice but to trade Brandon Ingram. And at the time, a lot of people were saying that, oh, that was a pretty good haul because we got a first round pick out of him. But it should be noted that the pick that we got was from the Indiana Pacers next year. The Indiana Pacers are 2 games away from the finals currently. So odds are that's not going to be a very good pick. Bruce Brown is almost certainly going to leave in free agency. I don't even think that he was in New Orleans for the last like 2 months of the season when he had to be here, but as soon as summer rolled around, he was the fuck out of New Orleans immediately. And what are we left with? Well, we got Zion, whose baby mama just got arrested for assaulting his mistress. This is true. This happened this month, the past like 2 weeks. So her name is Akima Love. This is like the ex boozy background dancer. Apparently she did real estate, but from what I've heard, she used to work at like the Hustlers Club, like local stripper. She got arrested in the past like 2 3 weeks for egging a woman's home, threatening her on social media, and then assaulting her outside of Zion Williamson's home. She then apparently had no getaway plan because she ran into a nearby gated community and was almost immediately picked up by the police. I just This is unbelievable. She didn't drive there. The house is in Kenner. Whatever. Maybe she lives nearby. I guess she would. Zion wants his baby close. Like in the end, Zion is the one who dominates the headlines for this era because nobody wants to talk about the fact that David Griffin is sending off, second round picks and first round picks to, make up for to like correct his mistakes in trading for Steven Adams and Eric Bledsoe and yada yada. Nobody's talking about the fact that we traded away Dyson Daniels and he immediately won Defensive Player of the Year. All anybody wants to talk about is the fact that Zion keeps dating OnlyFans models and is impregnating random local women. and can't seem to find time to play basketball between it all. But, we do have some things to be excited about for the future, I guess. Trey Murphy looked really, really good for a lot of the season. Like, it seems like he's kind of ascending into, maybe being able to be like a second or third option for a championship level team. But even for him, like significant injury to end the year because he's playing in huge minutes because we have no one else to play. Everybody says that he's progressing really, really well and that he should be ready pretty soon after the season starts. But, the injury woes continue all the way down the line. DeJounte Murray tears his Achilles, a la Boogie Cousins, and he is going to be out for the first at least 3 months of next season. And you're paying him, by the way, for at least 2 more seasons. who knows if he's going to be the same player that he was before? And he wasn't that great before, particularly for the fact that he is not a very good shooter. Not great again, next to Zion Williamson, who is entirely paint dominant. We drafted Eve Misi last year, and it didn't look amazing. He looked pretty good next to the DeJounte. When he had an actual point guard to play with, he didn't look like a total zero on offense. Like he's athletic, he's tall, he can catch lobs. As soon as DeJounte's gone, Eve Misi is just a complete nothing burger on offense. He has no game whatsoever. He's athletic, but it's not like he's super agile. So he looked okay defensively for the most part. He can block shots, but that's not like he can guard multiple positions. He's just kind of standing near the hoop and is tall. And once again, cannot shoot. So the roster construction next to Zion doesn't look any better than it has for the entire time that he's been here. In fact, it's gotten worse because Jonas at least could take a 12-footer. He's a rookie who started playing basketball like 4 or 5 years ago. Is this really the guy that you want to like hitch your wagon to and say he's going to be our starting center from now on? Or are you just going to go into next year and be like, yeah, we're just fucking starting 40-year-old Kelly Olynyk? And then there's Herb Jones. Apparently, Herb Jones is just not communicating with anyone. He's fully incommunicado. He's like gone fishing for the past 3 months. Nobody even knows what's going on with his injury or if he's going to be ready for next year. Literally, the only saving grace outside of Trey Murphy and the potential that Zion is maybe taking basketball seriously now that he's like a father. He did seem like he was in much better shape at the end of the year, but I mean, he only played 30 games, so it's are things actually better? But the only real saving grace that we have, a la David Griffin, is the Milwaukee Bucks picks. Because it seems like the Bucks are imploding. It seems like the Bucks are on the verge of trading Giannis Antetokounmpo, and so having their first round picks, I believe next year and the year after that, one of them's a swap. Those are now insanely valuable all of a sudden. This is like the only positive asset outside of Trey Murphy, who again is hurt, that the franchise even has. And we also have all of our own picks. So like maybe there's some amount of trades, some amount of moves that you can make where the team doesn't look like complete shit. But frankly, I doubt it. I mean, we'll fucking see. The worst conceivable thing that could have happened in the draft lottery happened. Not only do we drop to 7, but 2 division rivals end up with the first and second pick in the Dallas Mavericks and the San Antonio Spurs. And it seems like you're just becoming increasingly irrelevant in the Western Conference if you're the New Orleans Pelicans. It's hard to imagine things can turn around, but the Pelicans are doing something, at least. They fired David Griffin and have brought on hip youngster Joe Dumars. For those of you who don't know, Joe Dumars was the head executive of the Detroit Pistons back when they won a championship with Chauncey Billups and Ben Wallace and Rasheed Wallace and all of those guys. Just about as old school of basketball as you can imagine. And he's supposed to come in and turn the ship around. Now, I don't want to cast aspersions on Joe Dumars. He could be a good guy to lead the franchise at this point because one of the real hallmark of his time with the Pistons is he sort of collected this island of misfit toys. These like malcontents in Ben Wallace, Rasheed Wallace, and even Chauncey Billups. And he got them all to buy in and to play their best basketball when it mattered, and they won a championship. Despite all the odds, nobody expected them to win. And so if anyone's going to come in and get through to Zion, maybe it's Joe Dumars. I figured that's the thinking. But it doesn't feel like we're moving in a good direction to me. Just simply for how the David Griffin situation ended. So David Griffin wanted to fire Willie Green in the middle of the season, and ownership said no fucking shot. And I mean, this should be a surprise to nobody because, of course, Mrs. Benson is like best friends with Willie Green. Willie Green is this like God fearing man, and Miss Benson is like devout Catholic, right? So they get along on like a fundamental level. So as soon as it was floated that David Griffin wants to fire him, well, that's his death sentence right there. He was gone that day, and I imagine that is just about true because as soon as the season ends, it's announced David Griffin is out and Joe Dumars is in. No kind of like you know candidate searching or like this job was never open. It was decided before it had even happened that Joe Dumars would be the replacement. And why is Joe Dumars the replacement? Well, he's friends with fucking ownership. He's friends with Mickey Loomis and all those motherfuckers, and he's been wanting this job forever. It was like the obvious pick, right? There was probably no one ever even really considered other than Joe Dumars. It's, same as it ever was. The little bit of credit that I will give to Mrs. Benson is she has invested in the team. They got a new practice facility, they got new medical staff. She seems at least willing to spend money on the team. And we very nearly paid the luxury tax this year. And I'm not even going to hold it against her that we ended up making the Brandon Ingram trade with the idea of not paying the tax in mind. Because that was absolutely one of the like main catalysts of the move. It was like, I'm not going to pay a shit ton of money for this team that is, fourth, fifth worst in the entire NBA. But we're one of only two teams to have never paid the luxury tax. And that says a lot. We're just, the team's not interested in being competent. The team's not interested in winning. That's not the goal. And it's not a coincidence that so often players leave the Pelicans and immediately experience a like career renaissance. They achieve their best achievements in their entire careers are immediately after they leave the New Orleans Pelicans. You can look at, obviously Anthony Davis and Drew Holiday both win championships within 2 years of leaving the Pelicans. Julius Randle had his pit stop here before he went to the New York Knicks and makes an All-NBA team. Dyson Daniels immediately wins the Defensive Player of the Year. I already talked about Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Josh Hart has way more acclaim now thanks to the his time with the Knicks than he ever had with the Pelicans. Even though I would argue he's roughly the same player. But we're a stepping stone. We're a pit stop. We're where you go and you have that period where you're like, oh, I gotta lock in. Like things aren't going well. I'm not like, you know, I'm not going out a lot. It's like I'm really just focusing on myself. That's what the Pelicans are, man. Where your low point, where you bottom out, and you realize like, oh, I gotta start taking shit seriously. I was like the epitome of people's time in New Orleans, and we're best at developing these no-name, undrafted people, these Jose Alvarados, these Najee Marshalls, and Willie Green himself is like kind of the embodiment of this idea of like a bench player, a guy who doesn't have a ton of natural basketball talent, but managed to work hard enough and grit it out that you could like carve out a career for yourself in the NBA. That is our identity as a team. But for all that it's doom and gloom looking at the future of the New Orleans Pelicans, and I mean, yeah, sure, it's not entirely doom and gloom, but it feels mostly like it. The team has managed to give me happy memories. It really has. And so I want to kind of shine a light on some of the unsung heroes. Just a quick shout out. Just gonna name a bunch of people who used to be on the team. Do any of y'all remember Check Diallo? This dude was like 7 foot tall. Basically, I think he had started playing basketball maybe 2 years before he joined the team. Has literally no basketball talent, and he would only play like 12 minutes a game. But in those 12 minutes, the dude was just like in a dead sprint the whole time. He would beat literally everyone up and down the court every single time. It was like watching a fucking gazelle. And then they'd pass him the ball and he'd just like fumble it out of bounds. But every once in a while he'd catch a really cool lob. That's a player that I've really loved watching on the Fells for a while. Ish Smith, that's another one. Who I stand by is like, Alfred Payton is kind of in the same category, where it's just he's just a guy who's available and he keeps being on the team over and over again. But he's got a pretty nice handle and he makes some cool passes. And it's like, wow, it's kind of nice having an actual point guard on the team. Who else? Oh, let's do the. This is like the Ryan Anderson era. We at one point had just this collection of unathletic white people that were at least funny. We had Ryan Anderson was absolutely the best among them. And we had Omer Ashik, who inexplicably would play like 25 minutes a night. We had Luke Babbitt, Jeff Withey, and Jimmer Fredette, all on the team at the same time. I think we made the playoffs that year. I'm pretty sure that's the year that we get swept by the Warriors. But it's like when your team's biggest aspirations are a second round exit, you have to just somehow like find a way to derive pleasure from just mediocrity at best. And it's almost always in New Orleans. And I mean, this is true for the Saints as well. Like all of that pleasure comes from the like unsung hero type players. Right? It's your like second round pick Herb Jones who turns out to be a really good defender. It's Najee Marshall and Jose Alvarado. Like Jose's the one who's getting a chant for him. It's not Zion, it's not Brandon Ingram, it's not CJ McCollum, it's not even fucking Jonas Valanciunas. It's going to be Jose Alvarado, it's going to be Josh Hart, it's going to be Nikola Mirotic. Always, always, always it's going to be the guy who is not making the most money, not scoring the most points. Ever since really Anthony Davis left, and even while he was there, because the city just doesn't want to identify with the entitled superstar. We're all much more interested in the guy who never really had a shot at making it, but somehow performed far better than expectation. And so, while I'm pretty negative about the way that the team is often handled, where the way that the team is coached and managed, and the attitude of ownership, and the fact that our players can never seem to stay on the fucking court, I know that we are going to continue to get players like that. It happens with the Saints too. Like, do you remember Chris Ivory? I'm probably let's just cut this part. No, no. Oh, yeah, it happens with the Saints too, right? You get guys like Delvin Breaux and Chris Ivory and Trey Hendrickson kind of fits that category as well. It's just like these people who you didn't expect to be good, and then they play really well, and now they're your favorite player. It's just like the epitome of New Orleans sports. And so it's so hard for me to imagine us ever like getting over that hump. Like how many undrafted free agents do you have that outperform expectation before you're like actually a contender? Like do you need just 15 of them and then that can be a championship team? It's just like that kind of thing is never going to be the thing that gets you over the hump, that gets you into contention. But it's basically the only saving grace of the franchise. Ooh, here's another one. Jordan Crawford. None of y'all are going to remember Jordan Crawford. Jordan Crawford is the cousin of Jamal Crawford. And he was known as Instant Grits. I would bet so much money that Jordan Crawford came up with his own nickname. Like, we signed him from the Grand Rapids Drive on a 10-day contract. And then signed him for the rest of the year because he scored like 18 points in a game. And we were like, all right, well, At least somebody can play basketball around here. The team that I think has the most correlation with the Pelicans is probably the Sacramento Kings, which is funny because we have this long trade history with them, but it's just like pure ineptitude, always make the wrong decision, never really try to contend, like just make the playoffs at best. It's so the same vibe. Part of it is that we're in a smaller market, but I'm like, you know, so San Antonio, so is Milwaukee, so is Denver, right? Like these are like roughly the same sized markets. That's not the only reason that we are not successful. And I mean, it is true that we have a lot of issues with attracting free agents. We basically never sign anybody significant in free agency throughout like the entire history of the team. Everybody is either drafted or traded for. With like basically the lone exception of Rajon Rondo. I mean, really, think about that. You can go up and down the list. Brandon, like C.J. McCollum, Brandon Ingram, both traded for. Zion drafted, Anthony Davis drafted, Drew Holiday traded for, Chris Paul drafted, David West drafted. Shit, Tyson Chandler might have signed in free agency. Let's check that. Nope, Tyson Chandler traded. Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's really no one. Even DeJounte Murray traded for. And that's extremely restrictive. That makes it a lot harder to build a team. So it's hard to completely blame David Griffin or Dell Demps for not being able to build a championship caliber roster. And it's hard to blame the coaches, Willie Green, Stan Van Gundy, Alvin Gentry, for not being able to elevate a roster that isn't good enough. And, same goes for the Stars. And fuck, like, can we even really blame Zion for his whole injury history? I think absolutely yes, but can we really when everyone else on the team seems to always be out with injuries as well? Like, it's not just him. I don't know. I heard that Marie Laveau's house, her old house, burned down, so maybe the curse has been lifted and we can get happiness again in New Orleans, but we'll see. And I don't even really know what this podcast was. There was no real plan. I just have a bunch of tabs open, like stats and like Wikipedia pages and blah blah blah. So I don't know what this was. I guess it was the history of the New Orleans Pelicans. Regardless, thank you all for listening. If you listened to the end, which you probably didn't, this was the punishment. I am the host who shall not be named here to remind you all that you're absolutely fucked next season. Good night.